I'd like to call to order the Wednesday, March 13th Audit and Finance Committee meeting. We are joined by Board President Mike Reamer and by our Superintendent, Dr. Timothy Steinhauer, and by Rob Gletko, our new Finance Director. We have a single item on the agenda tonight, and it is School Budgeting 101. That presentation will be delivered by Mr. Gletko, and I personally and on behalf of the board want to express our gratitude to Mr. Gletko for taking the time to put this presentation together. I've taken a look at it, and it looks it looks very comprehensive and clear, and again, we appreciate your efforts.
Thank you.
And without further ado, Mr. Gletko, why don't you get us started?
Thank you, Mr. Bill. Well, welcome everybody tonight to the Audit and Finance Committee. It gives me great pleasure to present to the Audit and Finance Committee and the community this evening. I hope tonight's presentation will give you some clear insight into how school budgets are prepared, how they comply with the Department of Education, the PA Department of Education, PA School Code, local school board policy, and the expectation of our community. So without further ado, School Budgeting 101. This is a great quote I found. It's actually at the beginning of my school budget book, which I took during my master's degree. It was School Financial Management and School Financial Planning. This was one of our main books. And it describes the budget as a very powerful tool, one of the most important pieces of the government process. It's a decision maker, both financially and programmatically, for the school district. I want to begin with our mission and vision. As we can see there, we're always trying to improve, and I believe that us in the finance office are doing the same thing every week. And of course, the superintendent's goals. The board sets the superintendent's goals and objectives, and we fund them through the budget process. This is our new strategic plan starting with the 1920 school year. It is the goal of the finance office to align our budget with the strategic plan. Our community demands results from our schools, and we take pride in producing those high-quality results in the budget and financial reporting process. We talked pretty extensively about this slide Monday night, but our approach to budgeting is a little different here in Mount Lebanon, as we do not mold our programs and support around budget constraints, as most districts do. We focus on how to create the best student outcomes. Our resources are allocated toward those academic, athletic, activity, and arts programs. And as you can see here, the students in the classroom are the biggest piece of the circle, and anytime there is a decision made, we like to make that decision as far away from that center circle as possible. So at the heart of what we do here is the PA School Code of 1949. Yes, most of the code is still the same from 1949. It hasn't changed that much, particularly the financial section. If you Google the PA School Code of 1949, you want to look for the 600 section. There's a myriad of policies and procedures that we have to follow, and the state requires districts to comply with these long-standing laws surrounding the budgeting and management of funds, and of course the levying of taxes. You know, our local school board levies a huge tax amount on our community, and the code guides us on how to do that legally, and we must comply with that every year. Additionally, our board must comply with the governance expectation of the school code. So we have to approve necessary action items, which we did in January with the opt-out resolution. We'll take another step in April where we complete the proposed final budget, which will be adopted by the board, and then the final adopted budget at the May meeting. So all that is driven by school code. The biggest piece of school code, which I'm going to discuss next, is, of course, of Act 1 of 2006. And then we do a lot of documents here. We do our budget document. We do a lot of presentations. There's a document called the PDE 2028. That is the state-mandated budget form that our budget goes on. It's about 75 pages long. They want to see it in a particular format, but any statistics you see at the state flow through that PDE 2028 form. So let's talk a little bit about Act 1. This kind of sets the stage for how our timeline works, how the budget process works. Like I discussed, January 22nd, we took the accelerated opt-out resolution. So the Act 1 is the Taxpayer Relief Act. The idea behind the law is to ease the financial burden of home ownership by reducing property taxes using gaming revenue. So in 2006, when this state instituted gambling, schools were promised a portion of that money. We get $1.7 million from the state every year. That money is allocated out to all the homeowners in the community. It equates to about $185 per homeowner, and you'll see that reduction on your tax bill if you physically receive it. In addition, the law also limits the amount school districts can raise taxes. So before 2006, school boards could go out and raise taxes 1 mil, 2 mil, 5 mils, however they felt they were out of balance. So a lot of times there were long lag periods in between tax increases. Act 1 stopped that by saying, hey, you can only go to a certain index, which is around a half a mil. There are some exceptions available. But it really took a toll on people in the business office that weren't used to it, because you had to really plan for the future. If you wanted to issue some sort of debt, or if you wanted to do a project, or you knew in 5 years you would need to add so much staff, you would have to increase millage accordingly to build that into your budget to finally get there at the end of the road.
Could I just briefly interrupt, very briefly?
Sure.
That Act 1 index, can you briefly share with us about, or the thinking behind its calculation?
Certainly. It has to do with job rates from the Department of Labor. It has to deal with people who own their homes, and it's really a indicator, sort of like inflation, but a piece of it is from federally funded legislation, a piece of it is from state legislation. It's a bit of a convoluted formula that takes into new jobs and home ownership, and that's what essentially establishes the index of 2.3% every year.
The cap of...
Exactly, the cap of 2.3%. So what that meant to this school district is 0.56 mils. So you couldn't go over that, and like I said, previous to 2006, boards were able to exceed that extensively. So it's an inflationary tactic that they say, hey, you're getting this gaming revenue, but now you can't increase your millage above that. Now, the gaming revenue, interestingly enough, since we've added more table games and different kinds of slots and sports betting, we always expected that money to increase. The money has never increased. We've received $1.7 million from the state since 2006, and that's it. So once we comply with school code and we align with our Act 1 timeline, the board has local policy that describes what we do in the budget process. The board has a grouping of financial policies in particular that address the budget expectations, surplus funds, and fund balance. They're located in Section D of the local policy manual. Board policy dictates that the district must keep 6% of the next year's fiscal year's budget in unreserved fund balance. Right now, that's around $6 million. Fund balance in excess of 6% are transferred to capital projects funds or to fund post-employment benefits. Fund balance is really the key financial health indicator for our bond rating agencies. Moody's suggests anywhere from 5 to 10% of unreserved fund balance. We have our policy set at 6. In total, most strong districts, if they were considered strong financially, keep 2 months of bills in fund balance. So we have fund balances across 2 funds. They total just over $20 million. And 2 months of bills here is actually $17 million. So we are a cut above that when we talk about our fund balance. But I encourage anyone to look at those policies. Board policy, specifically DFAA, has reference to our fund balance limits. The next step in the budget process, of course, developing the guidelines has to do with the board policy and Act 1 and, of course, the school code. Then we get into the preparation of the budget. Enrollment and staffing are a key piece of the budget. I'll show you at the end. As much as this is general for any school district, we've used some of Mount Lebanon's numbers at the end here. But once we know our enrollment, we can plan for staffing accordingly. We do a census every year around this time that's mailed out and people respond to online, and we calculate children that are coming into school age. Of course, a lot of the programming decisions that academia makes drives some of the staffing issues or staffing needs, such as maybe a principal at every building. We have to meet nursing ratios across school code. There has to be one nurse for every 1,500 kids, so that's something you can't escape. And then, of course, the growing need for our PCAs. So once you get away from the salary and benefit piece, and then we'll talk a little bit later about our debt, the other columns that we use in our budget, purchase professional services, repair and maintenance, supplies and equipment, those we handle in a way called zero-based budgeting. So we don't assume that budget's going to roll over every year. We kind of start from scratch and start from need, and we meet with our budget managers, and they fill out some forms to request what they need to move forward in that fiscal year. So really, these allocations to our budget managers are done after salaries and benefits. To continue the process, the development process, the process really starts probably immediately after the audit is completed. We do our audit, usually present it to the public in October and November. Once that wraps up, we have locked-in numbers for the prior fiscal year. All our reports are filed. Then we begin gathering information and making more detailed assumptions. In November, that's really only 3 months into the fiscal year. The biggest part of the fiscal year doesn't start until September because our teachers don't get paid on their new salary until September. So in November, we start projecting fiscal year-end figures, and we trend and see how much we've collected every November for the last 5 years and try to make estimations going forward. So the actual preparation of the budget. So what we presented Monday night and what I'll show you in here is actually where we're at in this budget preparation process. We have an estimate of expenditures, we have an estimate of revenues. We combine the two, and that's how we get what we talked about Monday night was our deficit that we're trying to reduce expenditures and increase revenues to combat. Our early estimates on budget are known far sooner than any other school district I've ever worked in because we prepare what's called a Meritus Budget Award here, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the end. But we project 5 years into the future starting now. We're going to meet with some board members soon, and we'll show them those projections and how their decisions that they make today are going to affect 4 and 5 years down the road. So this is the process we're actually in right now, the modification of the budget. So we're looking areas where we're underspending or over-collecting revenue, and we're adjusting those things accordingly because we cannot deficit spend. School code is a violation of school code to overspend the expenditure piece of your budget. Again, this quote here at the bottom, cuts should be made as far away from the classroom as possible. This is, again, another reference back to our student-centered model as we start at the outer ring and work our way in when thinking about reductions or presenting those reductions to the board. The budget approval process is a little bit how I described in the beginning. So we have a base budget that we present in March every year. In April, we'll adopt the proposed final budget. And then in May, we adopt the final budget. We're in that cycle. We've been in that cycle. As I spoke to Jan this week. Before she got here, they were in that cycle. It's a very heads-up move to do that. We get our tax bills out early. We coordinate with the municipality to create some savings, and then any of those tax dollars that we receive in the month of June, that's an extra bit of revenue that we receive that other school districts do not. And as a note, the proposed final budget is required by school code to be on public inspection after it's approved. So for 30 days, anyone can come up and get a copy of what I was described earlier as the PDE 2028 to examine that. So this is how the quote kind of worked back into this presentation from the beginning. The budget administration, this is our major fiscal management tool. We talk about the budget and our financial health literally daily. Each transaction in our software, it calculates real results. When we put a purchase order in, it shows it hitting against that account immediately. And like I discussed Monday night, we're going to take this exercise a little further in the next fiscal year, where we had a budget transfer on our agenda, and we're going to force budget managers to look at their budgets every month and reallocate their monies as spending's happening in real time. All right, so this is all our revenues that come into the school district. So the big piece of the pie, or the blue pieces of the pie, we have the kind of light Carolina blue, I'll call it, the navy blue, and then the little 1% sliver of blue. These account codes, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, 9,000. You can find those account codes in any school in the United States. That is the Department of Education account coding. Now, they are adapted to Pennsylvania in certain ways that they like to sequester their reporting, but you can go anywhere and say, can I see a report of your 6,000 accounts, and people will know that is local revenue. Our local revenue
Robin, this is a snapshot of Mount Lebanon.
This is a snapshot of Mount Lebanon.
Not
So-
every district.
Not every district. So I think I touched on that a little bit Monday night too. We're heavily, heavily reliant on local taxes here.
Could I just interject
Absolutely.
real quickly? So the local taxes are, of course, the real estate taxes, the millage that we assess. And we also charge in earned income tax, right? Which is 1.3%, I believe?
It's 1.5. The municipality receives 1%. We receive the half.
Okay, so we are funded not only locally by our real estate tax, but also by earned income tax as well.
Correct. Yeah, so there is we get 3 or 4 taxes locally: property tax, earned income tax, a local services tax for people who work here, and then realty transfer tax, and then any delinquencies in those taxes. The next biggest piece of the local is actually our interest income, which is on pace for about $1 million this year, and that's what makes up the majority of that other local tax. Of course, there's some charges for services and building rentals and parking passes and such that go in there, but they don't make up a big enough percentage to even show up on the graph. The 7,000 section is all our state funding. Of course, the 8,000 is all our federal funding. You know, school code actually dictates that it's supposed to be a 50-50 split between the state and between the local. So I've worked in districts where this pie has been flip-flopped, and 78% of the budget came from the state, and only 20% or so came from local sources. So it's essentially our school funding is not fair and doesn't comply with school code, and hasn't for many, many years. So being 65% of our budget, everybody's always interested in what the assessment is and how do we calculate millage and how do we turn that millage into a budget number that we feel comfortable with. The assessment number is always a moving target. There's always appeals. There's always new people moving in. This is a snapshot in time. We will get the next snapshot in time on April 1st. And then we apply a myriad of factors to that. Our millage rate are available to collect. In the red, you'll see that $1.7 million that has never changed. That's the $184 per homestead that is redistributed throughout. Then we have our potential revenue. Now, our collection percentage over our many years here is 96.91%. So it's very, very good. Anything over 95% is excellent. Of course, some of those taxes aren't collected or paid in an early discount period, and we take all that into account when we calculate this. But this is where you see how intricate on the millage rate line, 24.32 to 24.8794. So that is 0.5594 mils. That's the specific 2.3% increase that Act 1 drives for us. So again, I touched on the local income when we looked at that pie chart, but here is the rest of the breakdown there. EIT, the earned income tax, is actually our third biggest revenue source. And you'd think, that wouldn't be true, maybe basic ed funding. Our biggest revenue source behind real estate taxes is actually the PSERS fund. So we, again, discussed that Monday night, how the PSERS bill is $17 million, and then we recoup $8.5 million of that on the back end, after we pay it to the state, they reimburse us for 50% of that. So that's actually our second biggest revenue source behind that. Again, interest income, you know, it was a struggle from 2008, 2009 on. We didn't count on much interest income here. We use a bank called the Pennsylvania School District Liquid Asset Fund, and it uses money from across the state, from all schools, pulled together to drive higher interest rates. It's actually a $6 billion fund right now, and we're collecting anywhere between 2 and 2.35% on our investments, which are specifically CDs.
Can I just interject?
Sure.
You mentioned PSERS, and I think we just have to comment briefly on first what it is. Perhaps most folks know, but it is the pension fund for our teachers and administrators. It is underfunded for a variety of reasons, and our contributions as a result are very, very significant. And again, we contribute, we get partial reimbursement from the state, but it's a huge part of our
It's a
budget.
huge outlay. It is. And it's it started at 4.78% in 2009, and we're up over 34% right now. So almost 35 cents on the dollar for everyone paid here goes to the state pension
Of a salary dollar.
of a salary dollar, right?
And for years, the required increase in our PSERS contribution has been the primary driver behind any and all millage increases.
Absolutely. It used to be literally the only reason for a millage increase. We're on pace this year for only it being 0.16 mils of our 0.56 mil increase. It seems to be a habit of people in my position to translate everything to mils. I was working on a spreadsheet today, and we were working on what 0.09 mils equated to, which is about $262,000. So that's how specific we're getting as far as developing our millage rate. Our other big piece is the basic education funding. So this is our fourth largest revenue source, and this changed in 2016 and 2017. It used to be a number that the state would maybe add 1% to every year and send it back from you. We didn't have an actual written down, bargained, voted on in the legislature basic education funding formula. We do have that now. It did come into effect in the 2016-2017 school year. It includes all these factors when they figure that out. ADM, for everyone's reference, is our average daily membership. So we report on children monthly to the state. We do a year-end reporting. So our ADMs and our child accounting also drives heavily what we receive from the state. So it's very important those reports are right. It is noted that in 2016-17, we can never receive less than we received in 15-16. So the formula is only on the governor's new money, which is he distributed $50 million more dollars to schools this year. The formula is used to divert that to the 500 school districts in the state.
So what are we on track? If the governor's budget went through, Rob, what would we be on track?
We're around $95,000 today in new money. So we do get some other state funding as well. We get a special education piece, which continues to rise, and there's another very detailed report that our special ed department puts together in coordination with our student accounting department, and we will have to make sure that's correct because that derives a lot of our reimbursement in special education. Of course, our Ready to Learn grant, our homestead allocation that we mentioned a few times, the $1.7 million, our PSERS reimbursement, which is 50%. So 50% that we expend, we recoup a quarter later from the state. And then we also get reimbursed for Social Security and Medicare expenses at 50%. So in most private sector businesses, the employee pays their 7.65% share. The employer distributes their 7.65% share. We actually recoup 50% of that back on a reimbursement. We do get a little transportation money, even though we don't have much transportation here. We are we adhere to a formula and complete a state report for that every year. And then we also get about $100,000 in medical reimbursement, and that's for some special needs students and some of our nursing needs. So that rounds out the state funding. Now we do get 5 sources of federal funding. These 5 sources total only $1.5 million. We get our Title I dollars. We actually use that specifically for 1.2 reading specialists in our 2 Title I schools. So they're paid from our Title I money. Professional development is usually what's paid for from Title II money. That's what we use it for here. English as a second language is ESL, which comes from our Title III dollars. IDEA money, which is a pass-through from the IU. So the majority of our special education services, as far as OT, PT, audiology, some things like that, are done by our local Allegheny Intermediate Unit. They hold those funds, and we draw down on those IDEA funds for special education, and we have to comply with some federal regulations in that regard. The last piece is our medical access fund. So any of our special education teachers and PCAs complete a system called random moment time sampling. So the state will send them an email and say, tell me what you were doing at 10 a.m. on Tuesday. If they were with a special ed student that day, that drives our funding up. So it's an intricate system. It has to do with Medicare reimbursements. So that's another piece. We get anywhere from $150,000 to $200,000 a year in that federal fund. So again, we're back to the chart of accounts. If you went, again, anywhere in the country and you asked for, let me see a copy of your 1,000 accounts, people would know, people in my field would know that that has to deal with instruction. Of course, 2,000s are support services. That's any of our nurses or administrators. Operation of non-instruction. Facilities acquisition and construction. During our renovations here, everything in our capital projects fund was booked under a 4,000 account. And then the 5,000 account deals specifically with transfers and our debt. So if you look in our budget this year, you'll see the $11.2 million for our mortgage payment. That's captured in the 5,000 section of our budget. So just to think about our student-centered budgeting again, 70% of this budget is in instruction. So then you see the outer rings as we get farther away from that. So enrollment's another big piece. We're very lucky here in Mount Lebanon to be around 5,500 children probably for the last 30-plus years. We're landlocked. We don't have a lot of new houses, but young families continue to move in here. We use a formula called the Cohort survival method, which I learned in this book right here. We take live birth rates from Allegheny County. We take live birth rates from people born in families in Mount Lebanon. We calculate when their children turn age 5, and then we use some historical data to project those through the sequences, through the years to try to project our enrollment. I think last year we were within 9 bodies of predicting our enrollment using this method. Our historical data comes from the 3rd day enrollment of the 1st and 2nd semester. So we take a snapshot on the 3rd day of school, and then we take a snapshot on the 3rd day of the 2nd semester, and we compare those two. So this is another breakdown of our chart of accounts that we have to deal with. The chart of accounts is a very long number, and they all mean something. The salary accounts are the 100 section. So you would see a 10, which meant general fund. You would see a 1,000 number that would mean instruction, and then you would see a 100 number after that 1,000, and that would indicate to you that that is a salary. So 48% of our budget is salary. So not only are they salary, they're collectively bargained. So we know 2, 3, 5 years in the future what our contract groups are going to get paid, and these are, of course, all the local union groups and, of course, other agreements as far as our administrators, and some of our administrators even have separate agreements beyond that. So we know what those folks are going to be paid. It's all collectively bargained.
If I could just interject so folks know that we just signed a new deal with our teachers effective June 30th of last year. Is that correct? And that runs for 5 years. That runs for 5 years. So as Mr. Galecko was saying, we have a very good idea as to what to expect in terms of salaries and benefits. And we recently also signed a collective bargaining agreement with that second category, the secretarial aides and support staff.
No, I'm just fighting a cold. I'm sorry.
So Those labor agreements allow us to, I think, very successfully project into the future what our primary expenditures will be.
Certainly. Sorry, I've been fighting this cold all week. Let's flip to the next slide. The benefit slide, which is also collectively bargained, deals with a myriad of other things: health, dental, vision, life, long-term disability insurance, workers' comp, unemployment comp, and pay in lieu of insurance. So just between those two slides, you saw 78% of our budget is literally filled out before we start. We use a software. We use actually two softwares in a spreadsheet, and actually two different models of, in our software, a personnel system and a payroll system that we use to calculate all of this. And then most people know a teacher's contract is dealt in steps. All those steps are entered into the software. We know how many people have local years of service, what step they're on, what master's degree or advanced degree they have, and that system moves them through the steps, and then we, of course, hand check it by spreadsheets. But that's how we determine all our salaries and benefits.
If I could just also quickly interject, the health benefit is, and perhaps Dr. Steinhauer can correct me if I'm wrong, but we participate in, along with many other school districts, in the consortium. There are literally hundreds of millions of dollars in premiums flowing into that. Our former finance director, Jan Klein, is part of that and has done a fabulous job of controlling the increase in healthcare costs. Our typical healthcare cost increase is
2%.
low, 2%, and
2%.
it is a godsend. I cannot imagine, so often in the private sector you see healthcare cost increases sometimes in the double digits, and the fact that ours are so low is tremendously important, and just want to compliment that organization on capping costs and also delivering, I think, very fine quality health insurance. I think I can say with comfortably say that our employees are satisfied with the health insurance benefits they receive.
Yeah, what Mr. Beal described, all 57 schools in and around Allegheny County pool their resources to buy health insurance. It's actually a $350 million self-insured fund that they pay their own claims. There's no stop-loss insurance. There's no buying insurance elsewhere. They collect the money. They pay the claims from this fund that's managed very tightly by a myriad of local school board members, superintendents, business managers, trustees. In addition to that,
Labor.
and there's a labor force on the board there. There's 24 board members. So people from PSEA, other teachers unions, all participate on that board, and they come up with the health care plan. And it's a all for one for all mentality across 57 school districts.
I'd like to also add that all the employees do contribute to that.
That's correct.
A substantial amount to that too.
They
So
do.
it's
So
not free.
We pay a % of premium here, which the next year the family premium will be about $1,600 a month, where an employee would be responsible anywhere from 10.5% to 11.5% of that cost per month.
Rob, would you like to take a 5-minute break?
No, I
You
just want to
sure?
get through it. Yeah.
It's all right if you want to.
Yeah, do you want to take a break?
No,
5 minutes?
I just have this terrible. I've had a cold all week. I got a lot of stuff going on. But
Even
we'll
though
make it.
this is being filmed and it will be in there for
I
posterity.
need this edited, Steve.
Okay.
All right, so now we're into our other 11% of our budget. So this makes up, again, more categories, 300s, 400s, 500s, 600s, 700s, purchase professional services. Our consultants, our legals, our auditors, and a lot of our special education consultants come from purchase professional services. Repairs and maintenance, insurance, transportation, and travel, supplies and software from the 600 section, and then any equipment new and replacement comes from the 700s. So besides staffing the district, this is the only place to create any kind of expenditure reductions, either through less supplies, less equipment, or a reduction in services. Here's our last
Well, I
11%.
think, let's take a 5-minute
I'm so
break.
sorry.
Yeah.
That's all right, no problem.
Steve, if you could stop the tape. It is 11:35, and we will reconvene this meeting at 7:40 to give Rob
I'm
a
so
chance to
sorry.
catch his breath.
We took a brief break from our meeting. I would like to reconvene the Wednesday, March 13th meeting of the Audit and Finance Committee. Again, there's a single agenda item. It is School Budgeting 101 that is being delivered by Rob Galetko, and he would like to talk at this point about the district's or debt service in general.
Thank you, Mr. Bill. So we've came to the part of our budget, which I described earlier as the 5,000 section. Also in the 900 object code section is our debt service payment. So the district has outstanding $138 million in debt. And that's, of course, because of this beautiful building and all of the construction of our elementary schools. This is how the debt projects for the next and through 2035. So again, like to point back on how we fill this budget out, we start with our salaries and benefits. We add our debt service. We're at 89% of our budget before we've purchased anything. Before we purchased a service, before we bought a book, before we turned on the lights, bought toilet paper, 89% of our budget is filled out. So again, debt for service being a big part of that, 11% of our budget. Again, there's some standards out there from the Government Accounting Standards Board that says anywhere from 10 to 15% of a normal general fund budget, government, is usually for debt service. We do have a potential refinancing in August of 2023, and we had our last bond refinancing in August of 2017, and that brought in a little over $6 million back to the school district by creating some savings through less interest rate. If you see this, the scale step up here, 2 slides, the district took a lot of that in savings and put it in capital projects funds to do such as the Rock Powell on the Hill and some more air conditioning projects. Those numbers step up for 2 more years, and then it levels off and actually reduces through the end of the term here. So I've seen districts take it all in savings, or they would reduce the payment for the life of the loan, or they take it all out and keep the payment the same and use it for capital projects. We did a mixture here, which I believe was a great decision and set us up very well for the next 20 years as far as debt service is concerned.
So just to review, again, in 2017, refinanced about $50 million in debt. I believe it was the first high school bond issuance, and saved nearly $6 million, and used half of that for tax relief, and half of that was added to our capital fund. The district spends somewhere between, not to get too down in the weeds, between $500,000 and $1 million on capital improvements or maintenance year in, year out. Also, in capital expenditures are books and technology as well. So we need to keep that fund adequately sufficient to cover those costs. Another way we fund the capital budget is by transferring underspending, is that correct?
Correct.
From our operations into that fund. So again, we have the resources we need to invest in our buildings and books and technology.
Certainly, and like Mr. Bill described, in a small over-collection of revenue and a small underspending of the budget is usually right around $1 million here. So that's only 1% of our budget. That's how close we cut it every year, and that $1 million is essentially transferred to the capital reserve fund to get the purchases that he described.
And maybe just one more thing. Once money is transferred into the capital fund, it cannot be pulled back out for operational expenditures. We can access our general fund to help balance our budget, and we do that. We take a small amount of money from our general fund to help us with tax relief, potential tax relief. But it is very modest, and it we also ensure a 6% reserve, a minimum 6% reserve.
Correct. So we're on our last piece of the pie here, and this is our object code for our expenditures. This is, again, was what I described earlier as the 300, 400, 500, 600 schedule. This has the salaries and benefits on it. You can see, again, that 78% of the pie is made up of our people. We're not in the business of making widgets here. Our people are our asset. Our people educate our kids. They keep us safe. They clean our buildings. That's where our expenditures are captured. You can see how small the other sections of that pie are, and then you'll see a little bit in the dark blue there, our debt service, again, at 11%. So that's how it's made up. Like I said, it takes a lot of calculating of salaries and benefits. It takes a lot of zero-based budgeting and scrutinizing of things other than salaries and benefits to make up our budget. And then, of course, we have our mortgage, and it's not unusual to have that mortgage. We need that mortgage. We need these buildings. And again, that sets us up for the next 35 to 40 years, which is what the useful life of a building is accounted for. I mentioned some books earlier. We're governed by all these school codes and local policy regulations. These two books here, this is from the Association of School Business Officials International. This is their guide to budgeting. This is where a lot of this presentation came from. And then, of course, on the reporting end of it, we do something called a Kafir, a Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. That is driven by the Government Finance Officers Association, and this is all our accounting standards that are in the Blue Book. So a publicly traded company would report to the SEC, or the Financial Accounting Standards Board. An arm of that is the Government Accounting Standards Board, and that's who develops all our policies that we use for internal control and budgeting and reporting that accounting information at the end of the year. And then our last document is our Meritus Budget Award. So I don't know how many people know that we do this or that it's out there. If anyone wants one, I'd love to give one to you. This is an impressive 192-page document that tells you more statistical information about this community, about this school district, about where money's going today, tomorrow, and for the next 5 years, and more information about our other funds, our food service fund, our capital reserve fund, our donation accounts. Those are all projected in here. That is unusual for school districts to do that as well. Most people submit a general fund budget, and that is it. So I encourage anyone to go out on our website and grab this and read this. We've received the Kafir Award, the Excellence in Financial Reporting Award, for 36 years. The next piece of that, that has to do with our audit and our year-end financials. This has to do with our budget. We've received this award for 34 straight years. So we will continue to do this. This award recognizes school districts in the United States for excellence in school budget presentation. It sets a high standard. It's very transparent. It's easy to understand. It communicates to stakeholders. To say how unusual it is, there's 500 school districts in this state. 14 of them complete this. On this side of the state, Mount Lebanon and the city of Pittsburgh. Everyone else is on the East Coast.
If I could just interject, that looks like a handful. That looks like quite the phone book. It is beautifully put together and extraordinarily user-friendly, and contains not only budget information but demographic information.
Absolutely.
And it is as easy reading as you can imagine, given the topic.
Certainly.
And I would suggest folks get a copy, review a copy. It is just very, very interesting information, and beautifully laid out, just beautifully laid out.
If I can add something too. Before I ran for office several years ago, I went and took a PSBA class on school budgeting. It was basically a sold-out event, and the speaker used Mount Lebanon School District as the model, and said that several times throughout. These awards are not easy to attain. There's a lot of work that goes into it. Mr. Galetko came in here and has hit the ground running, and I've been very proud of what he has done.
Thank you.
And you've picked up basically just where Jan left off. and the excellence is continuing, and I thank you for doing this work here and putting this together. And
Certainly.
And another upside to being so professional in assembling a budget is the bond rating we receive. We have a very, very high bond rating, which produces very, very low interest rates that results in refinances that save extraordinary amounts of money. And again, part of the piece to that puzzle is our budgeting, outstanding budgeting process.
Certainly, and be all end all, at the end of the day, it's our school board that has ownership of this and who votes on this budget. So my communication to you and how you understand this and how you make your decisions, that's what drives us to be so transparent and get the right information to you. So we'll take any questions if anybody has one. If I don't know the answer to your question specifically, I can get back to you. We covered a lot today. Again, this is pretty much how everyone puts a budget together. We use Mount Lebanon's figures because they're easily attainable to us. In April, we're going to probably go a little more in depth and get very far in the weeds on how we do some of this stuff. And you won't just see maybe 600 level things. We'll drill down into what we're actually spending on certain departments and bodies and all that sort of thing. So I thank you all for coming.
So no questions or comments? Okay. With that, I'd like to adjourn the March 13th meeting of the Audit and Finance Committee, and again, thank Mr. Galetko for an outstanding presentation.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Steinhauer.
Thank you. So this was videotaped. You'll get to see Rob's cop out.